Hello, my name is Miguel Perez, and today I'm going to talk a bit about some of the new Shockwave Pyro tools that have been added to Houdini 19. Before that, as a sort of introduction, I worked for a company called Megalis VFX, which is in Japan, that started as an effects-centric house where Houdini was used not only for effects, but also for lighting and rendering. And now over the years has evolved into a sort of medium-sized studio that does projects ranging from live action to CG animation, but keeping Houdini still at the core of the pipeline, which is very exciting. But let's dive into the topic for today. So in Houdini 19, there is some new extra Pyro quick setups that you can find in the shelf above. If you click in this Shockwave button, then you're gonna get a preset that kind of shows the common use that you could give this new Shockwave tool. Let's look at the sourcing, which is happening here. If we skip through the frames, we see that we're getting the sourcing for an explosion, but then there's also this kind of 2D classic ground shockwave that is being fed into a pyrosim. If you actually render this thing or make a high resolution flipbook, this is the result that you would get. This being the flipbook and this a render in Karma. So basically the main goal of this new Shockwave tool is to help you get started and take you to a nice looking Shockwave very quickly. Unify all the workflows that everyone has. While this shelf tool is going to place the classic .NET in OBJ and subnet, I think it's the nicest way to look at it. So let's just do it a bit differently. If we put down a geonode and add a Pyro configured Shockwave, we're going to get exactly the same thing, only laid out in subs using the new shiny Pyro sub wrapper, which has been revamped a bit for this version, especially in terms of interface and organization of parameters. But this way you get everything neatly in a single place. Now the Pyro sourcing for the explosion is a good old Pyro burst source node, which was covered in depth in the Houdini 18.5 release, so nothing new here. But if you look at this guy, it happens to be the same exact node, only now it's in Shockwave mode. And we can see that it's just creating a bunch of points and moving outwards. So to sort of explore all the controls of this new Shockwave tool, let me create one from scratch, because I think it's nicer to see that way. Put down a Pyro Shockwave source, which is going to give us the most default behavior of this Shockwave tool. And as you see, it's just a very quick 5-frame Shockwave. So let's see. The shaping controls are quite self-explanatory. Initial size will just give you, the initial size. Shape offset is kind of a seed, a random seed, and you can change the spread of the Shockwave. Give it some thickness. Could even limit the azimuth, so you only get a strip of it. But yeah, let's put this back to the defaults to make a flat ground Shockwave. You could decrease the point separation if you want to have more density of points, and the trailing depth will give you kind of the how full the Shockwave is from the center to the rim, pulling all the points. You could also add some noise to the shape, which is very handy to get organic looking Shockwaves. Increase the amplitude, change the size of the noise. You get all sorts of funky results with this. And yeah, that's pretty much all the basics. In terms of the animation of the Shockwave, which is very important, you have the animation tab, and here, apart from the start frame, which is quite obvious, we have the duration of the Shockwave. So if I increase this a lot to 50, now it's gonna last for 50 frames. we might even want to decrease the initial size. Now, if you want it to reach further out, then we have the expansion controls. So we have both interior and exterior, and you'll see in a minute what this does. The exterior control just controls the expansion of the outer rim of the shockwave, and the interior, you set it to 0, then you'll get no expansion in the middle, but you can set it to the same value to get a nice parallel motion between the inside and the outside. This is kind of nice because you can make all sorts of weird behaviors, maybe something that doesn't expand so much in the middle. And then if you expand the folder, then you'll get the curve that the expansion actually follows. So if you want a very fast shockwave at the beginning, you can tweak this, go very extreme. It's going to explode out really fast. But the interior, because it's following this curve, then you're still coming out slowly. And then because this is based in the same tech that the explosion sourcing is, that means we can do all the cool things like I'm gonna put down a grid, put down a scatter. I'm gonna scatter some points in a grid, and this is gonna be where my shockwaves are gonna happen. So make this bigger. If I now plug this to the shockwave node, and I get a bunch of shockwaves. Now they're all starting at the same time and everything, but I could go to the animation tab and in the start frame, click on the dice here, and it's gonna put an attribute adjust float, which is a super handy node to control attributes, as you know from the previous version. So let's say I'm gonna randomize my start frame attribute from 1 to 20. Now I'm gonna get the shockwaves coming in at random times. Kind of looks like water ripples. But yeah, all the things you can control with attributes. You have all the information here, so that's super handy. Get rid of this now. Now, in terms of what you get as an output, you can have multiple components. In this case, you see the blue, the white, and the orange, yellow colors, which correspond to density, temperature, and burn. These are 3 different point clouds with these attributes. So if you don't care about having any burn or even temperature, stick to a single point cloud, then you can simplify this and get just what you want. And another handy feature of the shockwave is that you get velocities happening. If you go to the output attributes tab, you have the velocity multiplier here, so you can scale it up and down and even add some noise. So, if I want a crazy shockwave that once I put it through a pyro sim or a pop net, it's going to give me crazy velocities, then I can do all that. Okay, so now that you've seen the basics of the shockwave, like the 2D ground shockwave, let me show you another style of shockwave that you can make. If you go to the quick setups here, you have many handy things like placing down a pyro simulation automatically after the shockwave and all sorts of things. But you also have this blast wave with rings preset. If you look at this, in fact, I'm going to create the shockwave from scratch, just to get all the parameters to the default. Quick setups, blast wave rings. What this is going to do is set the type of the Pyro burst source node to this blast rings mode, and this is basically shockwaves but stacked in different heights. So this is a very quick shockwave. So let me change again the duration and maybe the expansion of it. Now if we play it in real time, actually, you're gonna see the classic nuclear blast shockwaves that expand outwards, but always following the shape of a spherical shock front. I can adjust the distribution length here to make them occupy more space. As the sphere reaches a certain height, then it triggers the shockwave. I can change the distribution along this height as well. So I have a ramp here that I can maybe choose focus in a thin strip. You know, place them all there. Let me increase the point count to see better. Yeah. Now we can decide exactly where we want these guys. Increase the number of rings, reduce, add some of the shaping noise that we had before. And this secondary node here is just the sphere for guidance, so you could get rid of it if you only care about the shockwaves in the end. All right, so now that we know how to use this, let's explore an example of a production scene. So let me go here to my movies. This is a showcase movie that I put together trying to use the Shockwave tool in as many places as possible. So, you know, classic nuclear blast, you know, very large scale, that produces some of these aerial rings. So I use the Shockwave in a few places. Obviously the thick Shockwave happens at the bottom. There's this thin one that expands on the ground. And then after a while, you have the ones in the air that also follow a spherical front. So all in all, there's you know, repetition of this tool in a few places. And I have the scene here, so I can walk you through it and kind of show you how I approached it. So everything happens inside this subnet. And these are all the individual components of the explosion. So, you know, we have the main mushroom cloud, we have the ground shockwave, aerial one, the one in the ground, and then these trails here. So all these little sections. I plugged everything into this origin point, which means that if I wanted to move everything to a different location, I could start from here. But it's also a nice visual way to connect everything to a route, so to speak. Let's go first to the explosion, which is the most straightforward one that you know, was already possible in the previous version of Houdini. And it's mainly based on two burst sources. And because I wanted this kind of dual shape of you know, a main mushroom cloud with some fire sagging below for these you know, two big parts of the explosion, I found that making a source like this gave me the right behavior once I put it through the Pyro sim. And then I coupled this to a source for the central column of smoke that rises after the mushroom cloud goes up. And this is also a shockwave node, basically. I just did something very extreme with some noise that changes over time. And then I run this through some noise to get some more interesting shape of the source. Then all together into a Pyro sim and into the new shiny file cache node to get the simulation out. So this is what I got in the end. Nothing special here, just the usual settings that you almost get with the default explosion shelf tools. And then the good old Pyro look node. The cool recent Pyro look node, which mimics all the internal scattering from the explosion, kind of pre-computes the really nice lighting. I did some tricks to boost this area around the secondary shape, because, you know, by default I wasn't getting enough temperature in there for the fire to shine. So I just, you know, turned these torus into VDB and then increase the temperature field using it. So you see what happens if I don't have that. And it, you know, allowed me to, throughout the shot, keep this going for longer. But apart from that, there's nothing special to it. Let's look into the thick ground shockwave, which I have here. This is a very simple source, pretty much what we saw before, just tweaking the parameters to get the timing right. I wanted to stop almost completely after a while, so, you know, tweaking all the curves in the right ways. And then added some noise, you know, with the adjust nodes, just to get some interesting source shapes. And then this plugs into the Pyro solver. In order to kind of get the right values in the disturbance and everything, I used this kind of delete to isolate only a portion of the shockwave. And since it has like a cylindrical symmetry, then it's easy to get your sim dialed, only caring about a part, which is going to turn everything into a much faster sim. But yeah, nothing special about it, just some disturbance, some turbulence. And then one of the things that I had to do was animate the timescale down so that by the end of the shot, we can pretend that this is so massive that the speed of the smoke has gone down quite a bit. So that was mainly by animating the timescale of the solver. And then cached out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just to get some extra detail, I did some tricks like resampling the volume to a high resolution, just reducing the voxel scale, and then affecting it through itself a tiny bit. And this tends to smooth out some of the boxy voxel artifacts that you could get. And it's a nice way to get something looking a bit higher res than it is in reality in the simulation. And this can be coupled with a volume convolve that sharpens the density. Kind of like if you were putting this through Photoshop and adding a sharpen filter. It's always nice to do this after a simulation. But yeah, some little tricks. Let's look at the thin shockwave in the ground, which we see here expanding at the beginning. Something very two-dimensional. And for this, it was really simple. Basically, another shockwave source, which animates outwards. And in this case, because I didn't really want to put it through a pyro sim, because that would be overkill in my opinion, what I did was just use a trail and then trail it backwards all the way to the start frame. So, if I skip some frames, then I still get all the trailing. This turns this into, basically what I would get out of a sim, but without having to simulate or cache anything. And then I just rasterize this to a VDB using the volume rasterize attributes. And, the density just gets some noise. So I just wanted to get some shaping in there, not so exaggerated. But yeah, super simple stuff. And now let's look at the aerial shockwaves. I have another Pyro source, but in this case it's set to the detonation rings that we saw before. And if I skip through the right frame, I just get this animation defined. I look through the camera and this seemed to be the speed that felt right. So after establishing these guys, instead of running it through a pyro sim, just like with the ground shockwave, which would be way overkill, I decided to do a pop sim. And the reason why I wanted to do a pop simulation instead of just a trail like before is because I'm using the explosion to actually affect this, these trails and disturb them a bit. So if you see around here, the explosion is disturbing the shockwave upwards and dragging it alongside it. So for that, I took the explosion sim, and then I blurred out the velocity field with the VDB smooth, just so it goes out a little bit. Then run this through a popnet, which basically just trails the points, keeps emitting and then affecting them, and this is the result. After that, I did some kind of random position jittering to get rid of the banding and the stepping of the simulation. Just something that happens really often. And then also before rasterizing to a volume, did some camera culling. So if we see the shot from this camera and I move to a frame further out, I don't want to really rasterize things that are not going to be seen. So this way I just get rid of some of the useless points. After that, just some noise to get some density breakup, and then using some of the attributes that come from the popnet, like the age of the particles, things like that. I kind of tweak the profile of the densities to something that kind of feels right. Starting very dense, but then decaying into the broken up density. And this just goes into the volume rasterize, and then I end up with a nice high-res volume that I can render. Also very simple overall. And then the last part, which doesn't really have anything to do with Shockwave, is these trails. But I might as well show it because they do use the Pyro Trail Path tool, which is a very handy tool. I just have some points scattered into a circle, and then with this node, I can very easily control some trails. You know, increase things like the spread, you know, and all this stuff. And then I simply resample this into a ton of points, run some noise through them with VOPs, which kind of gives the impression that the trails are evolving in time, as if there was, you know, real smoke being disturbed. And then after that, I used kind of a spherical guide of where my shockwaves are to also move the points slightly outwards. So, you know, when the shockwave passes, then they get disturbed a bit. Kind of helped with the realism of it, although everything is fake, of course. And after that, same story, just volume rasterize into a high-res volume. And now we are ready to render. Now for rendering, I used Karma, obviously, because it's a new shiny renderer and it's awesome. And this is all that it took to render these shots. One thing to notice is that there are two shots in this sequence, which means to say there's two cameras rendering the same explosion. So the end part of the shot is rendered through a secondary camera. And to get this without duplicating much in my LOPnet, what I did was I have my two Karma nodes, and before each of them, I define a context variable, which in this case is called camera, which means that anything that comes to this node is going to have this variable taking a value of 1. Anything that goes to the second camera is going to take a value of 2. And I can use this in various places, like for example, for my camera calling, like which camera do I call with? Well, I have this switch and then I have this expression. So if I'm in the second camera, then I go through the right, if I go through the left, which means that I don't have to worry about you know, setting the parameters back to affect the right things for the right shot. And it becomes a lot simpler to just trust your LOPnet. Here, I'm just importing my cameras, and then I import the elements one by one using SOP imports. So you'll see that the explosion and the air shockwaves, they get imported normally for both shots. But since the second shot, which is the one at the end, it doesn't have any notion of the ground shockwave or all those elements. So I basically only import the shockwaves in the ground and the trails in the right when I'm on the first camera. So the wide angle one. After that, I have my material library where I have all my Pyro shaders. Basically, all of these are Pyro shaders. Didn't tweak much from the defaults that you get when you place down the tool for the explosions. And then the shockwaves are just plain density with some absorption tweaks and things like that to give them a nicer color. And let's have a look at how these actually place when I try to render. If I display my hierarchy here, I see that first I have the cameras, then I get my explosion, and let me go to a frame which contains something. Obviously now it needs to pre-compute the internal scatter, so it takes a bit. Here we go, this is our explosion. After that, we have the shockwave in the air, which hasn't started yet at this frame. So basically, let's go to the thick shockwave, which also needs some pre-processing. Here it is. We have the thin shockwave in the ground. We have the trails on the right. All of this. All the materials get assigned. I have a sunlight and I have an HDRI that I had lying around. So if I go to the Karma node, which already sets some of the settings that I want to render with, and maybe maybe hide the background, I can simply switch to Karma and then see everything the way it should. There we go. I must say that for rendering volumes, it has come a long way, and you know, it's really handy. I was able to set up some of the AOVs that I wanted for the comp treatment and everything. And you know, if I go to my camera, I see everything the way it's going to look in the end, and then I can go to the shader and start tweaking things if I want. My explosion, for example, I don't know, too much scatter, then you know, I can just tweak everything live and get it the way I want, which is very nice. And when that's done, then I can simply hit render, or even better, I can come out in this top net here, just call my Karma node, and then you know, make it run, just cook the task, which enables me to render multiple frames at the same time on a single computer, which is why what I ended up doing for this sequence. Here's the result after some of the glowy treatment. All in all, it's a kind of shot that maybe in the past it would have taken a little bit longer to set up the right sources for the shockwaves. But now, thanks to the really cool Pyro Source and all its settings and variants, you can get something really nice really quickly. And the other advantage, of course, is that it kind of standardizes the way of doing shockwaves, so that you know, if you hand over your HIVE file to someone else, then it'll be quite easy to manipulate and adjust. So there you go. I hope you learned something, and then you get excited about making some cool shockwaves. Thank you very much.